Hello, hello.
Good evening. I started to say good morning.
I know, I heard.
Yeah. Oh, well, doesn't much matter. How is everyone?
Doing all right.
Good. We're going to steak grapes again tonight.
Okay.
Our, I don't know if you've heard the fiasco of the last 4 or 5 months, but our house flooded and we're still living in 2 rooms.
Oh, no, I did not hear that. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully in the next 3 months, we'll be done.
Okay. Yeah, we had a flood, not in this house, but in our first house when we first got here.
Yeah.
Rachel was an infant. She was under a year old.
Oh,
And we had to go live in a hotel.
yes.
Yeah.
We've been trying to avoid that, but I think we've just about hit our limits. We may end up going there.
I understand.
Oh,
All right,
Are you
everyone. Hello,
okay?
hello.
Are you okay because of yesterday? Was it anything in the family or why we canceled yesterday?
Oh, me? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Thank you. So, of course, it was many of you know, I work as a crisis negotiator for the San Diego Police Department. And yesterday was the last day of my on call. And of course, we got a call and there was somebody who was suicidal and holding his wife hostage. And so we went down and I knew it was going to be a long evening. It actually turned out a little less long than I thought it was going to be, but when Bonnie was here, that's why I had her send it out. I'm no longer on call, so I shouldn't be a problem anymore. At least not for this week.
yeah.
But thank you for your concern. I appreciate it.
Hi, Rabbi Kornberg.
Hello, Cullies. How are you?
Hi,
Hello.
just fine. Heard about what happened yesterday. Yeah. Glad that everything, did it go okay at the end?
It went okay. The good news was that everybody came out and he gave up finally and no need for violence and everybody was safe.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Baruch Hashem. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, really.
Good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Peter.
Hello.
Hi. It's a little bit late there.
Oh, this is a killer at the 10:30 here.
Oh, you probably took a big nap today.
No, I didn't get a chance.
It'll be worth it.
I was doggy daycaring for Morgan until about 20 minutes ago.
Oh,
So I don't know, the cemetery over in Island off of Route 18. I was there on Friday for my cousin's funeral. He had passed away the previous Monday. And his daughter is Nancy Chevelle and married to Paul McCartney.
Oh, wow.
oh.
Paul was there with Nancy, like 35 family members. But I got introduced to him as the family historian. And he goes, "Oh, I love getting those photographs from you." So it was very cool.
Nice.
Cool.
Very cool.
All right. Well, welcome. We still have a few more people coming in.
But he does say Kaddish well.
It's good to know.
Good.
His first wife, Linda, was Jewish. So 3 of his kids are Jewish.
Uh-huh.
You mean Nancy Chevelle of Chevelle Trucking?
Yeah. New England Motor Freight.
That's the one.
He was my mom's first cousin.
I thought that was her claim to fame.
No, she's Mrs. McCartney.
I know.
And her ex-husband is the Suffolk County executive, Bruce Blakeman. And their other cousin, Barbara Walters, was not at the funeral. She's
All right.
91. So she
Well,
didn't
let's begin.
Peter, we're starting.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's begin. I'm gonna mute everybody. So nobody's tempted. All right, so let's start. Today we're gonna actually start to go into the text of the book of Daniel. And we're going to look at it in sort of 3 parts, right? We're gonna look at 1 chapter today, because it's actually a very complete chapter that brings a lot of the themes that we spoke about last week. We're going to look at the chapter of the fiery furnace today. Actually, I should have changed the artwork from the lions to the fiery furnace. We're going to look at the chapter of the fiery furnace, which is chapter 3, and we're going to really focus on two different themes, right? First, we're going to see the power of God, and ultimately, we're going to see the polemic against idolatry that is so powerful throughout the book of Daniel. And as I said, we're going to look at it in three different sections. First, we're going to look at the text itself, and it's a fairly long chapter. I think there's 28 or 29 verses, so a few slides, but we'll go through it relatively quickly. We'll read through it. The second level is, okay, what do we get from this, right? Just as readers, what do we learn from it? What do we learn about Judaism? And then at the end, we're going to take a rabbinic look at it, and we're going to bring some Talmud and see how the rabbis take these verses and see where they go with it as well. So that's kind of our plan for today, and likely for next week as well, in terms of sort of the mode of how it is that we're going to do things. So, fiery furnace, Daniel chapter 3. Do we have a volunteer who would like to read so that I don't have to read the whole thing? Diana, you can start.
Sure. King Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits broad. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar then sent word to gather the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, officers, and all the provincial officials to attend the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
So the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, officers, and all the provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and stood before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. The herald proclaimed in a loud voice, "You are commanded, O peoples and nation of every language, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lyre, psaltery, bagpipe, and all other types of instruments, to fall down and worship the statue of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Whoever will not fall down and worship shall at once be thrown into a burning fiery furnace."
Okay. Right? So good plot set up here. Right? Good plot set up. This was a big statue, right? For those who do not know, a cubit is 1.5 feet approximately, right? This is a 90-foot statue, right? This is a big, big statue, and it's of solid gold, right? Or I'm assuming solid gold. So we have the setup here. Nebuchadnezzar is basically now saying to everyone, you need to worship this statue. And it doesn't say what it is. It could very well be that it was a statue of Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because a lot of the kings at that time really sort of saw themselves as deities in that sort of way, as god kings, right? Especially in Persia, we have that a lot. We sort of have this cross between gods and kings is very much there. And this obviously is a problem for Jews, right? Obviously going to be a problem for Jews. And it doesn't matter, right? The herald said, doesn't matter who you are going to fall down and worship, or you're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. Questions on this before we move on to the next? Okay. Who wants to continue to read? Somebody else? Go ahead. Mike? You have to unmute yourself, though. Mike, you have to unmute first, yeah. You got it?
Yep.
There you
Yeah,
go.
you'll hear us now.
Yep.
Thank you. And so as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lyre, psaltery, and other types of instruments, all peoples and nations of every language fell down and worship the statue of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. 8. Seizing the occasion, certain Chaldeans came forward to slander the Jews. 9. They spoke up and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." 10. You, O king, gave an order that everyone who hears the hornpipe, zither, lyre, psaltery, bagpipe, and all types of instruments must fall down and worship the golden statue. 11. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a burning fiery furnace. 12. There are certain Jews whom you appointed to administer the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those men pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your God or worship the statue of gold that you have set up. 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in raging fury, ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought. So those men were brought before the king.
Okay, so a couple things to note here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those are the three friends of Daniel, right? Those are the Babylonian names. We read that last week in the first chapter, that their names were changed. So these were Daniel's friends, right? Daniel's not among them, but these were Daniel's friends. And the other piece that's important to note here is this story could have gone very easily just by saying, well, there were 3 Jews who didn't bow down, and then Nebuchadnezzar would get angry. But verse 8 and verse 9, right? Seizing on the occasion, the Chaldeans came forward to slander the Jews. We get this strong sense of anti-Semitism here, right? This wasn't just, oh, the Jews were not doing it and Nebuchadnezzar found out. There were people who actually used this as an opportunity to try to get the Jews out, right? Or at least hurt these 3 Jews. Any other comments or questions on this? All right, let's continue on as we move through. And who's the next person who wants to read? Any volunteers? I don't see any hands. You can read again, Diana, if you want.
Sure. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in raging fury, ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought. So those men were brought before the king.
Actually, I think that was a repeat of last time. I have the same verse twice. Keep going.
That's okay. Nebuchadnezzar spoke to them and said, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my God or worship the statue of gold that I have set up? Now, if you are ready to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lyre, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all other types of instruments, well and good. But if you will not worship, you shall at once be thrown into a burning fiery furnace. And what God is there that can save you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said in reply to the king, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter, for if so, it must be our God whom we serve is able to save us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will save us from your power, O king. But even if he does not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your God or worship the statue of gold that you have set up."
Okay, very interesting development of the story here, right? For those who like to read in literature, you predict certain things. I do the same thing, like when I'm listening to music, you sort of predict how the music's going to resolve itself, and when it doesn't, it's kind of jarring, right? It makes you really wake up and say, wait a second, what's going on here? So the verse part of it is pretty clear and pretty straightforward. Nebuchadnezzar says, is this true? Right? If you bow down, everything will be fine. But if not, then you're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And then he says this line that actually sort of changes everything, right? And what God is there that can save you from my power? That line, everything changes from that point on, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are going to say, well, actually, our God is a God that can save you from your power. They're able to answer that question, and not, why are you not bowing down? Right? It shifts the whole discussion into a conversation not about idolatry per se, but about the power of God. And then they hedged their bets a little bit, right? In verse 18, and they said, look, we believe that God's going to save us, but if he doesn't, we're still not going to do it, right? It's kind of like, it's the opposite of that scene in The Frisco Kid, right? When he's with the Native Americans, and it says, he can do all these sorts of things, but he doesn't do rain. And then, the rain comes down, and just like that, he can change his mind, right? So it's the same sort of idea of like, we don't really know what God is going to do. We hope that God is going to do that, but we're not going to presume to say that God for sure is going to save us. And even if he doesn't, we're still not, even if it costs us our life, we're not going to worship your God or your statue. Okay. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar here is still angry. Somebody want to continue for us?
I will.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his visage was distorted, and he gave an order to heat up the furnace to 7 times its usual heat. He commanded some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to throw them into the burning fiery furnace. So these men, in their shirts, trousers, hats, and other garments, were bound and thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace was heated to excess, a tongue of flame killed the men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But those 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, dropped bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and rising in haste, addressed his companions, saying, "Did we not throw 3 men bound into the fire?" They spoke in reply, "Surely, O king." He answered, "But I see 4 men walking about, unbound and unharmed in the fire, and the 4th looks like a divine being."
Okay. So if we thought this was strange up to this point in time, now it's really getting strange, right? So he's still angry. He heats the furnace up in his anger and his rage. It's beautiful, symbolism of, it kept talking about he was filled with rage and filled with rage and filled with rage, right? The symbolism there, the parallelism there in the literature of heating the furnace up is really quite beautiful, right? And it's so hot, and we'll come back to this in the rabbi's text, it's so hot that the people that are carrying them die because they got so close in order to throw them in. But the 3 that were thrown in lived, and not only that, there was a 4th. And that 4th looks like a divine being, looks like a malach, an angel. Right?
I almost see a superhero movie with this last line, with the four beings walking through the fire, and like you think they're going to come out at you at like a CGI thing, like one of those Marvel movies. But
absolutely, Rob, absolutely.
It's a very well painted scene, especially line 25.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And again, this is all, by the way, in Aramaic. Right, this is our Aramaic text as we're going through. Brooks.
Rabbi, where is Daniel in all of this? Is he the 4th man, or where is he right now?
So Daniel is absent, except for the very end. We'll see in a second. Daniel is absent from this chapter. This is all about the friends. That's a good question. It's a really good question. And possible answers are that Daniel's going to come in at the end. Daniel was sort of above these 3, and so this first threat was to Daniel's friends, and it wasn't until later on, with the chiastic parallel towards the end of Daniel in the lion's den, that Daniel faces the threat, right? So the parallelism is first his three friends face the threat. Now he's actually facing the threat and it grows. That's probably the most reasonable answer, but Daniel is gone. Most people don't say that the fourth was Daniel, especially because the Aramaic uses the same root of malach, right? Which is an angel or divine being, divine messenger. Milt.
It seems to me also, I mean, the hand of God in this, not only in saving them, but it's almost like the strange fire that burned Nadav and Abihu. You know, it's like an act of God to destroy his strongest men, and for the three of them to walk out unscathed.
Unscathed, yeah, I like that. It's the opposite sort of Nadav and Abihu, right? Where in Nadav and Abihu, the fire consumed them because they did something wrong. This time, they're protected from the fire.
Well, but also God showing his power by burning up the strongest men of Nebuchadnezzar who were throwing them into the fire, and they survive. So clearly miraculously so.
Nice. No, I like that, Milt. That's good. All right, we're almost done. We just have a last little bit here. Who wants to read this? Go ahead, Rob. But you have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Nebuchadnezzar then approached the hatch of the burning fiery furnace and called, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the royal companion gathered around to look at those men on whose bodies the fire had had no effect, the hair of whose head had not been singed, whose shirts looked no different, to whom not even the odor of fire clung. Nebuchadnezzar spoke up and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel to save his servants, and who, trusting in him, flouted the king's decree at the risk of their lives, rather than to serve or worship any god but their God. I hereby give an order that any of the people or nation of whatever language who blasphemes the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and his house confiscated, for there is no other God who is able to save in this way. Thereupon the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
Okay, so the end of the story here, and I believe, just make sure. There's just a little bit more, which we'll get to in a second. But the end of the story is not only are their lives saved, but there's an admission from Nebuchadnezzar, who started with this whole idolatry thing, that there is no God quite like the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Who sends angels to save his servants who trust in him, even though flouting the king's decree, right? It is the most open sort of, not even in the Purim story, right? Achashverosh doesn't really, he's so wishy-washy. He was sort of, behind the scenes. He doesn't really get to do anything. It was Haman that was doing it, and he died. Fine, he didn't really. He stamped the edicts, but they weren't really his edicts. This was Nebuchadnezzar's edict, and he overturns it in this way. Very, very unusual, very powerful. You don't see anything like this anywhere other than the book of Daniel. Peter.
But unlike Moses, they don't say free the Jews and send them back to Israel.
No. Well, first of all, we know historically that's not the case, because the rabbis were very aware that was Cyrus that did it. Right. So they couldn't say that Nebuchadnezzar did it, because it just doesn't make any sense. We know historically that's not true.
Yeah, it's when you see like a miracle like that happen, you're looking for some really great, crescendo of, freedom here.
Well, look, I mean, the fact that they were promoted, this has some parallels, I would say, not to the Purim story, but to the Joseph story, right? Joseph was at risk. He was in jail, and then ultimately he becomes promoted to Pharaoh's number 2. So there's some, if we're going to look at some parallels, I would say it's a little close to the Joseph story in that aspect. Rob.
So you're saying
I would-
that,
Wait, hang on one second, Liz.
Nebuchadnezzar-
Rob, go ahead.
I would say that in some respects, it's almost like the Abraham story, because God, in essence, asked these people to do the most dangerous thing, give up their lives, okay? And as a result of being willing to sacrifice, but then, of course, not losing Isaac, God says, and I will make a great nation, I'll have you multiply,
Right.
Here, they, because of their faith, are willing to go into a fire which would normally destroy them. And as a result of that faith, they are promoted to be, in essence, sub-rulers of the province with riches and wealth and so forth and so on. So
Right.
I think it's
I
more parallel
like
to that.
I like the parallel, Rob. The only challenge I have with it is just the first part, because Abraham was told to leave everything. He was told to go. They weren't told anything directly other than be Jewish and don't worship idols. And so they were just living according to their morals, their own guidance. And they said, because we're doing that, God's going to protect us. We lack the element, which doesn't surprise us because this is a late biblical book, right? But we lack the element of divine command, right? That Abraham has. But otherwise, I like the parallel a lot. Yeah. Liz, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Well, you said that you thought Nebuchadnezzar is actually Cyrus. Like, are you talking
No.
about Cyrus?
Nebuchadnezzar is not Cyrus. That's what we were saying.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I misunderstood. Thank you.
Yeah. Brooks.
It sounds like a conversion story. It sounds like Nebuchadnezzar should be Jewish right now. And we
Yes.
know he's not, and the historians know he's not. He's an idolater and on and on and on. But this sounds like a conversion story to me.
Yes. And it's about as close as you can get without it actually saying it. And if you look at the words carefully, it doesn't say that Nebuchadnezzar actually converts, right? It says, look, this God, because they were dealing with pantheism and they were dealing with multiple gods. That wasn't a problem for Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar just basically is acknowledging the power of the Jews' God without diminishing his own, right? To say, look, I tried to burn this person and their God saved them. So I'm going to give props to that God. And I'm going to say anybody who blasphemes against that God is going to be in trouble. So it is as, I agree with you, Brooks, it is as close as you can get without it actually being a conversion. It's really just an acceptance. We actually see that a little bit with some of the Roman emperors as well later on, right? Of them sort of saying, like, you don't need to worship my God. So long, you worship your own God. I believe there can be lots of gods. So long as you pay taxes, I'm happy, right? Other Roman emperors wanted that worship, and then it became problematic. Linda.
Miss Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Hi there.
I'm here too.
Hi, Linda.
Hi.
So did this have any consequence to the Chaldeans? Because the Chaldeans tried to turn this into their favor.
So it's interesting. I originally wasn't going to bring that up, but since you talked about it, let's talk about it.
You went there.
Who are the Chaldeans, right? What's the Hebrew of the Chaldeans?
Don't know.
So Kasdim, right? Ur Kasdim is Ur of the Chaldeans. Who comes from Ur Kasdim?
Abraham,
Abraham, right? So
Terach, really,
the
right?
rabbinic midrash of Abraham destroying the idols of the Chaldeans, right, is being picked up here thematically with the Chaldeans trying to get some payback, right? That's how I see it. Because I believe that the author of Daniel knew the rabbinic midrash, right? And that Abraham came from there. And so I think it's really interesting that the Chaldeans are there. There's not really extensive payback, you know. The Chaldeans never win. They're never on top, so to speak, but it's not like the Purim story,
Right.
where Haman and Amalek and his, are killed.
Yeah.
Right.
I would just say, historical note, currently my daughter and son-in-law live in Detroit. Detroit has an enormous Chaldean community,
Yeah.
and they are very, very close in a positive relationship with the Jewish community there.
That is true. That is in present day, the Chaldean community is actually very close, in alignment with the Jewish community. Absolutely. But not back in the time of Abraham.
Are they from Persia? I mean, or
Yeah.
present day?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're not Muslims. That's what it is. And so they're non-Muslims. So they're a persecuted minority in that area, which brings them kind of in alignment with Jews at that point in time. Okay, so let's finish this up and then we'll talk a little bit more. Last little bit here. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all the people and nations in every language that inhabit the whole earth, may your well-being abound. The signs and wonders of the Most High God has worked for me. I am pleased to relate. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion endures throughout the generations. So this is furthering Brooks's, thesis here that this is sort of a conversion story, but it doesn't go so far as to say he actually converted, because historically we know that he doesn't. And, it's unlikely that these words ever cross the real Nebuchadnezzar's mouth, right? This is a crafted story that is being put out here. Okay. So what do we do with this story? What do we do with this story? And I'm going to take it off of share just for a few minutes so that we can talk and see each other a little bit more clearly. You can switch it to speaker view if you want, or gallery view, however you want. What do we do? What do we make of this story? What do we as Jews sort of make of this story? How do you relate to this story, as 21st century Jews? Not so easy.
I guess,
That's why we haven't taught this before. Go ahead, Diana.
I mean, I guess there are a lot of things you can say, but for the sake of time, it's really what you're willing to, how much you're willing to sacrifice to be Jewish when push comes to shove. An example is my late father was married to this just horrible woman, and I used to have Christmas dinners at her family's. It's a long story, and they would come out with the ham, with the pineapple ring on top and everything. And I was like, I'm not eating this. And they would tell me I was rude and I was this and I was horrible. And I just held my ground. Like, I am not eating this. And so it was like, well, I just threw that relationship into the furnace because I really didn't care. And so I think it's, to what extent are we gonna say, no, we are Jewish and this is how we behave and this is against what we believe in. No.
Nice. Thank you, Diana. Elishava.
Rabbi, I think that because they were in exile and they didn't know how long they will be, right? This is what during the exile in Babylonia,
Yes.
right? So I think that the leadership of the Israelites, the Jews, had to do some when it was, I don't know. It's probably they were encouraged with stories about greatness in which even the enemy would acknowledge the greatness of the one and only God, or it was kind of a way to publicize, to remind the people that in a very naive way, because that happened many years ago, and in the language that they will understand, taking as example the other stories of the other people around them, in order to bring them back to the right path, to the belief in one God. So kind of protecting them with those stories.
So your argument, I think, is an interesting one, right? Your argument is that there's a historical context to this of exile. And we did talk about that a little bit on the first, last week, that to some degree, people see the book of Daniel as a manual for living in exile, right? And this is sort of the aspirational part of it.
Or to remember where, or it's a way to keep the memory in them of the land.
Okay.
Like the dream of the return, which happened also with the Romans, and even nowadays we teach our children in the diaspora that there is Eretz Israel, there's the state of Israel, and they have to, I don't say we have to all go there, but we have to keep it alive. We have to protect it. We have to visit it. We have to make it stronger. So there's always this bringing the people to the memories, to the roots, to the basic ideas of Judaism.
Okay, nice. I like that. I saw Milt and Peter, and then I think I saw Liz.
So it's also it's a redemptive story about the power of God to sustain us when, if you wanted to take it really, to the present, to the fires of the Holocaust, but even when things are at their worst, and it's not surprising. There's a famous Negro spiritual about that has "Did my Lord deliver Daniel?" And it's I think it's also from the perspective of the enslaved blacks in the South, that as bad as things were, that there was an expectation that God would sooner or later deliver them from their own sort of metaphorical fires into which they had been cast.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. The message here is that, with faith in God, we can endure anything type of mentality. And if these three could endure the fiery furnace, then we could certainly endure whatever suffering we happen to be in right now, right? Is kind of the message that the reader gets from this. Peter.
I think it's a book of hope. I really find it, it's to give people hope in a period where they are stuck in idolatry. It's surrounding them, and this is to give them hope. And I think that's the story of Daniel. It's really hope.
Nice, Peter.
And eventual return.
Nice. Liz, did you have a comment you wanted to make? I thought I saw your hand up.
I was kind of stretching, but I totally agree. I feel like this is almost allegorical of just life. We all go through fires, and it's sort of miraculous that we survive them. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, that's nice, Liz. I like that. Rivka and then Rob.
I was just kind of taking it. It is a hope, a place for us to put our hope, but it also reminds us that regardless of whether God changes his mind and decides to bring rain, or save us from the fiery furnace. We have a responsibility in our relationship as Jews to be faithful to the one God, because God didn't promise he would get them out of the furnace. He didn't even speak.
Right. Right. That's the interesting piece here, right? I agree with you, Rivka. Is a lot of our other biblical stories,
My client.
with the exception perhaps of, the tests of Abraham with the binding of Isaac, our protagonists kind of know what God wants of them and what's going to happen. And then Moses was scared, but God said, "I'll be with you. Go do it."
Right.
So Moses did it. Right.
Right.
But here we don't have that. Here it's just sort of pure faith that they have. God isn't speaking to them, and they even say at the end that if God doesn't save me, then
I'm
I still
going
believe.
to make this choice.
Yep.
Knowing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Good, Rivka. Rob.
I would say that what's important here is what was the thing that triggered the Jews saying that they would not comply. It wasn't you have to dress like us. It wasn't that you had to eat forbidden foods. It wasn't that you had to intermarry. The story is set up for the ultimate test of monotheism. In other words, it was actually praying. So you've got to a false god. So you've got a people in exile, which by their very nature are going to have to learn how to survive in a society in which they're not in control.
Yes.
And I'm sure there was much assimilation and much integration, but when it comes to actually bowing down to a idol, and it's really set up with the 60-foot idol and the trumpet blares, and you have to actually bend down.
Right.
I mean, it couldn't be more of a dramatic test.
Yes. And
so it's sort of like, this is the line in the sand, So it wasn't.
Good, Rob. I like that.
It wasn't an easy test or ambiguous test. It was the ultimate test for a monotheistic peoplehood, and so
this is where
they had to do that.
Thank you. And going back to the two themes that we sort of drew out at the beginning of the power of God, right? God can save when human beings shouldn't be saved, right? And then the polemic against polytheism, against multiple gods, right, is very, very clear in this. It is the ultimate line in the sand for us as Jews. We're willing to accept a lot, but that no. March.
I was wondering, where does the concept of you can do anything to save a life come in?
So that's a little bit later. I mean, it's rabbinic as well. But idolatry is one of the things that that is the exception to that rule.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Right. So you were allowed to break any law to save a life, with the exception of 3. You are not allowed to murder. You are not allowed to do idolatry, and you're not allowed to do any of the forbidden relations. So if somebody holds a gun to your head and says, "Murder this person," or "I'm going to murder you," you got to take the bullet. Right? If somebody says, "Bow down," or "I'm going to kill you," you have to be a martyr. Although Rambam comes in and says that's only if it's public. If it's private, then it's you don't have to. You can do whatever you want because nobody's going to see it. And this obviously was public. And then the last one was the forbidden relations of not being intimate with a sibling or things like that. But other than that, yes, you're correct that you can break any law to save a life, but idolatry is one of the big 3 that you can't.
So what happens in war? Because I thought that was part of the understanding of why you can go to war, to be in war, because you're saving lives.
Right. So well.
But you would be doing murder.
War is complicated, obviously, but war in Judaism is very complicated. There are basically 2 types of wars that we are allowed to fight. There is the war that God tells us to, right? Well, then we don't have any ethical problems because God is telling us to, supposedly, although we may. And then there is a defensive war, a war to defend yourself, which you're allowed to do. We're not supposed to be doing offensive conquering wars, because from our perspective, like, our land is our land. That's what God gave us. We're not going out to conquer more. We're not trying to be the next Roman Empire, right? We just want to live on our land. That's the mentality behind it. So there isn't a war of conquest. That would be considered a problem. But a defensive war or a divinely ordered war are okay.
So World War I, World War II, no, that's the things that we're calling wars that were whatever.
Those were
But
defensive wars.
everything's, those are defensive, even though we're, I mean, I see it as defensive too. I was
Yeah.
just
Yeah. I mean, we didn't start it, right?
For sure, yeah.
But we went and did what we needed to do.
Yeah. Sure.
And the initiation of action isn't the determining factor, because the rabbis had no problem in 1967 with a preemptive strike. It was still defensive.
Yeah, definitely defensive.
Right. So it's not about initiating action. You don't have to wait, to get hit. I hear this sometimes with people in terms of the police. Well, until somebody shoots at them, they shouldn't shoot back. Well, by that time, it's usually too late. So you can protect yourself. Okay, let's go back now. I'll start showing my screen again. And what I want to look at actually is how do the rabbis see all this, right? What do the rabbis say? So what the rabbinic view, interestingly enough, there's a lot of conversation about this chapter of Daniel in Masechet Sanhedrin, which deals with capital punishment for the most part, actually. And it's not a one-to-one correlation. It's just interesting that it happens to be in Masechet Sanhedrin. So the first place that we're going to look, hang on a second, once I get this up and running, there we go, is from Sanhedrin 92b, right? And acknowledge that all the miracles were performed based on tradition. And the 4 ranks of officials from monarchies that were burned is related in a verse. It's interesting. There were 8. We're going to see later on. There were 8 that different types of officials that were called together. But afterwards, there were only 4. And those were the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the rulers were actually the 8. And then later on, there were 4. And it's written, there are certain Jews, they do not serve your God, nor worship the golden image you have erected. And it is written in the verse after Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah left the fiery furnace. Interestingly, the rabbis used their Hebrew names, not their Aramaic names. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and king counselors gathered and saw these men. So you saw the first verse, there were 8 different groups, and now there were 4 different groups. So Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather 8 ranks of officials, and only 4 ranks witness Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah emerge. Apparently, the other 4 ranks were the ones that were burned in the fire. So what are the rabbis saying here? It wasn't actually just the individuals who were putting them in. It was half of Nebuchadnezzar's ruling groups was actually destroyed. Now we see this. We see the rabbis do this in other places. We see it in the Passover Seder, where he says, well, it wasn't just 10 plagues. It was 20 or it was 50, because, it was the hand of God, and the hand of God is 5 fingers, so each is multiplied, right? So we see the rabbis try to expand, right, when bad things happen, so to speak, to the people that had it coming. But we see already Sanhedrin sort of picking this up and saying, it wasn't just the few people. The miracle was actually greater than just the fact that these 3 came out. The miracle was that God actually wiped out a lot of the evil people that were there in this moment. So the next section brings a baraita. A baraita is an early strata of rabbinic literature from the time of the Mishnah, from 0 to 200, that is found in the later strata of the Gemara, which was concluded or completed around 500. So the baraita is when we're quoting this earlier sort of level. And we usually pay attention to that. It has a little bit more clout, so to speak, in the rabbinic world than the later stuff does. At the moment that Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked, here, by the way, he's called the wicked, right? So the rabbis don't like him. At the moment that Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked, cast Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah into the fiery furnace, the Holy One, blessed be God, said to Ezekiel, go and revive the dead in the Dura Valley. If you remember, this was all happening in the Dura Valley. That's where it started. Once Ezekiel revived them, the bones came and struck Nebuchadnezzar, that wicked man, in his face. And Nebuchadnezzar said, what is the nature of these? His servant said to him, the friend of these three, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, is reviving the dead in the Dura Valley. Nebuchadnezzar began and said, how great are his signs? And that's the verse that we have in Daniel. So the rabbis are creating a little story about why does he say how great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders? Well, because Ezekiel raised the dead, right? Ezekiel's good at that. We know he does that, elsewhere, right? Ezekiel raised the dead, and the dead came and started hitting him. Again, we're compounding the miracles that are happening here. Another baraita. Let's compound it even more. 6 miracles were performed on that day that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were delivered from the furnace. They are: the furnace rose from where it was sunk into ground level. The furnace was breached, its limestone dissipated, and the graven image that Nebuchadnezzar established, which he commanded his subjects to worship, fell on its face. So that big, huge statue fell on its face, and 4 ranks of officials of monarchies who stood at the furnace were burned, and Ezekiel revived the dead in the Dura Valley. So some of the other texts we have were brought into this, but the rabbis, again, are we detecting a theme here, right? This wasn't miraculous enough, but the rabbis are now going to compound all of these miracles as we go. Here's an interesting last little bit. So this is a different take, also from Sanhedrin, but a different take. The righteous are greater than the ministering angels. It's a pretty incredibly strong statement. The righteous are greater than the ministering angels. Why? As it's stated, and he answered that I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of fire. They have no hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods, right? Nebuchadnezzar saw 3 righteous people and an angel of fire in the furnace, and noted the presence of the righteous people before noticing the presence of the angel. So again, the rabbis are doing what rabbis do with this text, and they're really leaning into those 2 ideas that we started with: the power of God and a polemic against idolatry, right? That's what we see in this chapter. Comments, questions that we have on this section? It's very interesting. I've enjoyed this a lot. When I will be honest with all of you, you know me well enough that I can be honest with you. I started reading the book of Daniel, and I actually started to try to read it in the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and I'm like, okay, I need to actually just read it in the English first, because I'm not going to get through it without my dictionary. But I read through it, and I was thinking to myself, I may have bit off a little more than I can chew with this class. This is really complicated stuff. This is huge. But I think the message here is pretty straightforward, and we're going to see next week a different type of message. What I will say to you is I'm intentionally not reading the Daniel in the lion's den section. because it's frankly the most well-known, and I encourage you to go read it because it's great. But we're going to look at another section of Daniel next week, and then we're going to look at a third section that deals with the Christianity aspect of it in that week that focuses on Christianity. So unless I really change my mind before next week, we're not going to look at that, but I encourage you to look at it. Remember, it's the chiastic parallel to what we just read here. So it's going to sound very, very familiar. Thank you, Diana, for putting the Sepharia Book of Daniel there. Peter and then Rebecca.
Where is the three that survived? Where is their praise of God in this whole thing? Where did they try and give thanks to God for saving them? Or don't they ever?
Ironically, it doesn't say what the response is afterwards, which is, I agree with you. It's a little bit ironic.
It's missing. It's like,
yeah,
I'm waiting for where are they giving thanks, and where are people who saw this acknowledging that miracle?
Yeah. So look, here's how I would answer you, Peter, is the rabbis are very cautious about saying, I told you so to rulers. That tends to be hazardous to one's health, right? They just came out of this unscathed. It was a miracle. There's a really strange but kind of amusing story in the Talmud that has to do with Purim, about two rabbis getting drunk and one rabbi killing another rabbi, and God bringing that rabbi back to life. And the next year, the first rabbi who killed the second rabbi said, hey, let's get drunk. And the other rabbi said, no, we don't depend on miracles like that 2 years in a row. Right? So it's kind of an amusing story, but it's kind of like, okay, we just got saved from Nebuchadnezzar, saying, no, our God is great. I told you so probably isn't the best idea. Mm-hmm. So that could be a reason why the rabbis chose, not, or the author of Daniel chose not to put that in there. But to answer your first question, their praise and faith in God is actually shown in their silence, right? By saying, we have faith and whatever happens, happens. That's it. That is that simple statement of faith. And it doesn't need to be more than that. It doesn't need to be in your face. It was quiet, it was there, and it was powerful. Rebecca.
Yeah, I was curious about the historical, like, since you said it was written later, was there something that the rabbis or whoever the author was reacting to that such a powerful message of against idolatry and the power of God that, was there something going on?
Probably Rome. This was written after the destruction of the temple. Rome was the dominant power through that time. This was written in the land of Israel, and that's what I would probably argue is the behind this is a story is against Rome.
Thanks.
Diana, and then Brooks.
When you talked about the sort of that faith going into the lion's den, the faith, it really reminded me of testimony from the Shoah, where people were being sent to the gas chambers, and they were, you hear the recordings of them singing Anima Amin Bamuna Shalema, like I believe with complete faith. And it just really reminded me, and some people got lucky, I guess, because they really did have like a real shower, like they didn't die going in, they didn't know, and other people just never, they didn't come out. But when you talked about the faith, it just really was very evocative of just a chilling imagery for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. Brooks.
So I'm struggling. I know you introduced the book of Daniel as kind of a transition from the the Jewish faith of the temple to a rabbinic Judaism away from the sacrifices of the temple. And when we read Daniel, it looks like it's kind of a repetition of Moses and Joseph and the and the Purim story. I don't see that transition yet, how it's laying down the narrative for a rabbinic-based Judaism. And I'm wondering if we're going to get there, or are we reading it and I'm just not seeing it yet?
So it's not, I would agree with you. This chapter is not, that is not its front and center purpose, right? There are other chapters that do that more, and we will see other sections. That being said, it doesn't mention the things that we normally would be doing because we're in exile, right? So these Jews are living as Jews, but they're not making sacrifices because they can't do that. They're in Babylon. So the very sort of nature, it's more under the surface on this chapter, the very nature that they're living as Jews, that they're able to interact with the world around them. They've got some people who like them, some people who don't like them, but that in and of itself is sort of a statement of rabbinic Judaism, because the only way you can do that is in a world of rabbinic Judaism. But I agree with you, it's not obvious in this chapter. Elisheva.
I have a question. I think I'm a little bit confused. So the book was written, as you said, after the destruction of the temple, the second temple.
Yes.
And the story is happening in Babylonia.
Yes. In supposedly
Nebuchadnezzar.
Right, supposedly about 600 years before when it was actually written. So it is a story that is a later writing that is pretending to be an earlier story.
So I have a question. Is the prophet Isaiah mentioned in the book of Daniel? Because supposedly there were 3 Isaiahs, according to the scholars, and the second one was with the people in Babylonia.
I don't think so, but I'd have to do a search to be sure.
Because one of the...
Diana's probably already doing it on Safari as we speak.
The prophet that was with the people in Babylonia was trying to bring them back to the right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you said last week that even when it's written that the Jews were crying by the rivers of Babylon, etc., not all the Jews were like that, or there were Jews that rapidly adapted to the new place, and maybe they were going far away from the right way.
Yeah, look, I would guess
the Torah rule.
I would guess that the answer is no, that the prophets are not there, because the rabbis were not interested in prophecy in quite that same way. They used the prophets in the Talmud later to come back and to make a point. But the rabbis were past the age of prophecy, and so that wasn't their focus.
But when you are asking us as modern people who know the past and in the middle and in the now, so we have to put them in a certain place. Like we have to look who was playing in the same time. I understand this is a rabbinical time, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. I can do a quick search. Hold on a second. Let me just.
I don't see
be,
a mention. There's a big response in Safaria on chapter 12, and it's honestly it's way above my head, but it's.
Well, yeah, chapter 12 is
and this is where they talk about. Yeah, they bring Isaiah. They just. Have some sources, but there's no real connection. It's just more like a reference.
Yeah, I would venture to say that none of the prophets are mentioned in Isaiah at all.
And part of my question is that the rabbinical period, that is when the rabbis take over the leadership after the destruction of the second temple, one of their many preoccupations or worries was how to keep the people not together physically, but connected, right? So
we still have the same issue today.
yeah, that's what I said. Like we tell those stories,
Yeah.
and we build a identity. Talking to students, right? We try to build an identity with roots in the past and ideas that they can kind of understand and carry with them.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think they chose to do that. Look, also the book is a named book, right? It's named Daniel. So I think they would be reluctant to bring in another, especially major player that has a book named after them into that book. That I think would be difficult. All right. I want to be respectful of time because we're already a few minutes over, but I gave you a little taste today of the book of Daniel. Rob asked what chapter was the story of the lion's den. It is chapter 6, and definitely encourage you to read that chapter. We're going to read some other sections of the book of Daniel, and then we're going to focus on chapter 9 and some of the later editions when we talk about Christianity.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. I just put a little request in the chat.
Okay, we'll add them into the Mishabach list.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, have a great week.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.